When I opened the old cedar box to count what was left of my father's funeral money, I didn't expect to find it empty. Only the faint smell of camphor and my mother's handkerchief remained, folded neatly, as if someone had wanted me to find the ghost of honesty in place of the cash. That's the moment my heart sank. It wasn't the money itself, not really. It was what it represented, everything my father had worked for, saved for, believed in. It was supposed to cover the last rites he'd wanted: a modest headstone, a small donation to the church, a proper farewell. I had promised him that. And I had trusted my sister, Olivia, to help me keep that promise. The trust was my first mistake. I remember the night before our father's funeral vividly. The air smelled like rain and lilies, too sweet, too heavy. Our house was full of people whispering condolences they didn't mean. The kind of people who brought casserole dishes just so they could count your tears. Olivia sat beside me at the kitchen table, her hair tucked behind her ears, eyes red but dry. She wasn't crying. She was tapping her long, polished nails against the wood, slow, deliberate. "We'll get through this," she said. Her voice was soft, rehearsed. I nodded, not realizing how carefully she'd already started planning her escape. Olivia and I had never been close, not really. She was 5 years younger, wild where I was careful, charming where I was shy. I was the one who stayed behind to care for our parents, while she went off to live, as she said, a real life. Still, blood is blood. When Mom passed last year, she came back home for the funeral and left just as quickly. But when Dad died 8 months later, she didn't leave. She said she wanted to make things right. I wanted to believe her. Our family home in Charleston was quiet now, too big for one woman and full of ghosts. The clock in the hallway still chimed on the hour, even though no one wound it anymore. I'd quit my job at the florist's to take care of Dad in his final months, and I hadn't gone back. The house became my whole world: creaking floors, tea in the mornings, my father's empty armchair beside the window. So when Olivia asked, "Can I stay a while? Just until I figure things out," I said yes. That was my second mistake. She moved in with 1 suitcase and 3 boxes, clothes, shoes, and what she called her memories. Within days, she had rearranged half the living room and insisted we repaint the kitchen. "Fresh start," she said brightly. I didn't have the heart to argue. It felt good to have someone else in the house again. The silence had been unbearable. At first, things were almost normal. We'd make coffee in the mornings, sit on the porch, and watch the sun burn through the mist. She'd scroll through her phone while I read the paper. Sometimes, she'd tell stories about the city, her job as a real estate assistant, her ex-boyfriend who never deserved her, her plans to start her own business one day. She always talked like life owed her something. Still, she made me laugh. For a few weeks, the house felt alive again. But there were small things I didn't notice, or chose not to. The way she'd take phone calls in the backyard, pacing like a lawyer. The way she flinched when I mentioned Dad's will. The sudden interest she took in my father's old desk drawers, "just organizing," she said, with that same breezy tone she used whenever she lied. I should have seen it coming. But grief dulls your instincts. It makes you believe that family is enough reason to trust someone. It started with the ring. My mother's engagement ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught light like a drop of morning dew. I'd kept it wrapped in silk in my jewelry box, along with Dad's watch and the key to his safe deposit box. One afternoon, I opened it, and the ring was gone. I thought maybe I had misplaced it. I even blamed myself. That's how deep the habit of protecting Olivia went. "Hey," I asked her casually that evening, "did you move anything from my dresser? I was cleaning and can't find Mom's ring." She looked up from her phone and blinked like she was trying to remember something far away. "The little gold one? Oh, I think I saw it on the counter. Maybe it fell?" I nodded, even though I knew it hadn't. Later that night, when I checked the counter, of course it wasn't there. A week later, I noticed small withdrawals from our joint funeral account. The one Dad had asked me to open so we could settle final expenses. Olivia had convinced me we should combine the money, her contribution and mine, for easier tracking. I'd agreed, mostly out of guilt that she'd been left out of so many decisions over the years. At first, it was $200. Then $500. Then $2,000. Each time, there was a new story. She needed to cover Dad's credit card bills, she had to pay for the headstone engraving, she was reimbursing a church vendor. I wanted to believe her. She always had a calm, confident way of explaining things, the kind that made you feel foolish for even asking. But deep down, I knew. Something was off. The numbers didn't add up. And neither did her stories. The final straw came 2 weeks later. I came home early from running errands and found her sitting on the floor of Dad's study, surrounded by boxes. The safe was open. She froze when she saw me. "Oh," she said, voice too high. "I was just looking for the deed. I thought we'd need it for probate." The safe door creaked slightly, still unlocked. Inside, I could see a small stack of envelopes, the kind my father used to keep his certificates, his insurance policies, and the funeral cash. I stepped closer. "The deed is in my filing cabinet, Olivia." Her face changed. The charming, sisterly mask slipped, just for a moment. Then she smiled, all teeth. "Oh, right. My mistake." That night, I barely slept. I could hear her moving in the next room, drawers sliding open, floorboards creaking under careful feet. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. The next morning, she was gone. So was the funeral money. And half of the heirlooms from my parents' bedroom. I sat at the kitchen table in silence, my coffee untouched. The sun was rising, but the light felt cold. There was a note written on the back of an old grocery list, in her looping handwriting. "I'm sorry, but I need this more than you do. I'll make it right one day. Live." For the first time in my life, I hated my sister. The days that followed were a blur. I called her phone, disconnected. I messaged her friends, no one knew anything. I went to the police, but they said since she was family and I had given her access to the account, it would be considered a civil matter. Civil. There was nothing civil about it. I couldn't even afford the final payment for Dad's grave marker. I remember standing in the funeral home office, my hands shaking as I tried to explain. The man behind the desk looked at me with that professional pity I'd grown to despise. "Take your time," he said gently. "We'll hold the order." I walked out, clutching the folder of unpaid invoices to my chest like a wound. Weeks passed. I started selling small things to stay afloat: an antique lamp, a few paintings, my father's old radio. I couldn't bear to stay in that house anymore, not with the hollow echo of her laughter in every room. But something in me refused to let her win. I needed to find her. Not for revenge. For closure. So I began digging. Bank records. Email trails. Old contacts. Every piece of paper she'd touched. That's when I found the first trace: a wire transfer to a pawnshop in Atlanta. The same one where our mother's wedding ring had been appraised 20 years ago. My hands trembled as I printed the receipt. She had sold it for $400. $400 for the one thing that had survived our parents' entire marriage, 2 wars, and a lifetime of love. That's when I stopped crying. And started planning. I remember the drive to Atlanta like a fever dream. The road stretched endlessly, a ribbon of pale gray beneath a heavy sky. I didn't even pack properly, just a change of clothes, a thermos of coffee, and the folder of papers that proved what she'd done. I told myself I wasn't going there to cause trouble. I only wanted to talk. To see her face when she realized what she'd taken from me wasn't money, it was everything. The pawn shop sat between a tattoo parlor and a laundromat. A bell rang when I opened the door, and a man with a tired face looked up from behind the counter. I showed him a picture of the ring. "She sold it 3 weeks ago," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Pretty girl. Said it was her grandmother's. Do you have her address?" I asked. He hesitated, eyes narrowing. "We don't give that out." I reached into my purse, pulled out the printed bank transfer, and slid it toward him. She used my father's funeral account, I said quietly. That ring wasn't hers to sell. Something in my tone must have worked. He sighed, lowered his voice, and scribbled a name and address on the back of a receipt. She mentioned she was renting a place off Peachtree. Be careful, be careful. It was strange advice to give to a woman whose heart had already been broken twice, once by grief, and again by blood. When I found her apartment, it wasn't what I expected. Peeling paint, a broken porch light, and a front yard full of cigarette butts. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the door. Every nerve in me screamed to turn around. But I didn't. I couldn't. When she opened the door, she looked smaller somehow. Thinner. Her hair was greasy, her eyes shadowed. She wore the same robe she used to steal from Mom's closet. Maya, she said, surprised, clutching the doorframe. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, I said. My voice came out steady, but my hands were trembling. You stole from me, Liv. You stole from him. She glanced over her shoulder, nervous. Can we not do this here? Then where should we do it? I asked. The pawn shop. The police station? She flinched, then stepped aside. Come in. The apartment smelled of smoke and cheap perfume. There were fast food boxes stacked in the corner, and clothes draped over a sagging couch. On the table sat a half-empty bottle of wine and a laptop. I needed the money, she said before I could speak. I was drowning. I lost my job, my apartment. You could have asked me, I said. I did ask you. You said things were tight. That wasn't an invitation to steal. Her eyes flashed. You think you're better than me. You've always thought that. This isn't about being better, Olivia, I said, voice breaking. It's about what's right. You sold our mother's ring. You emptied Dad's account. He trusted us to give him peace, and you. She slammed her hand on the table. Don't you dare talk to me about trust. You got everything. The house, the will, the sympathy. Everyone called you the good daughter. I was invisible. Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Because once upon a time, she wasn't wrong. After Mom's death, I had been the responsible one, the caretaker, the one who stayed. People praised me for my sacrifice. Olivia, on the other hand, had always been the runaway. And somewhere deep down, I knew that envy had curdled into something darker. Dad left me the house because I lived there, I said quietly. You didn't want any part of it. Until you saw what you could take. She looked away, her jaw tightening. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Then make it right. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, the bank receipts, the pawn ticket, the note she'd left behind. Sign a statement admitting you took it. I'll withdraw the complaint. You'll give back what's left. Her lip trembled, and for a second I saw the little girl she used to be hiding behind me when thunder shook the windows, begging me to braid her hair before school. But the moment passed. I can't, she whispered. Can't or won't. Her silence was answer enough. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of it all, the grief, the exhaustion, the years of trying to save someone who didn't want saving. Finally, I said, then you leave me no choice. I turned to go, but she grabbed my wrist. Wait. Maya, please. You don't understand what I've been through. I looked at her hand, the same one that had signed Dad's checks, the same one that had taken his ring. I don't need to understand, Olivia, I said softly. I just need peace. When I walked out, she didn't follow. I drove home in silence. The sky was dark, but it wasn't raining. The world felt painfully quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after an explosion, when all that's left is dust. Back in Charleston, I found the courage to call the bank and close every remaining account. I filed a claim for theft and submitted the receipts. The detective who took my report told me not to get my hopes up. Family cases like this usually die in paperwork. But for once, I didn't care about the outcome. I cared about the truth being seen. 2 months later, I got a call from a local jeweler. He said, I think I have something that belongs to you. When I arrived, he handed me a small box. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was my mother's ring. A man had tried to sell it again, but the serial number matched the pawn record. They traced it back to me. I cried right there in the store. Not just for the ring, but for the strange, fragile sense of justice that had found its way back to me, quiet and imperfect, but real. I put the ring back in its silk wrap that night and placed it on the mantel beside my father's photo. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel angry anymore. It just felt tired. I made tea, sat by the window, and whispered into the still air. I did what I could, Dad. I tried. A week later, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single $100 bill and a note. For the headstone. I'm sorry. L. It wasn't enough to fix what she'd broken. But it was enough to tell me she wasn't completely lost. I didn't expect to see her again after that letter. $100 folded inside an envelope, no return address, no apology beyond a single, trembling line that was the last I thought I'd hear from my sister. And honestly, part of me preferred it that way. Peace is a strange thing after betrayal. It doesn't arrive all at once, it creeps in slowly, like dawn through heavy curtains. Some mornings, I'd wake up angry again, remembering her face, her voice, her excuses. But other mornings, I'd just feel tired. Too tired to hate anyone. I focused on rebuilding. I started taking floral orders again, small at first, then gradually more. Funerals, weddings, Sunday services. Flowers had always been my way of healing. You can't stay bitter while working with something that dies every few days, only to bloom again. By spring, the house no longer felt like a tomb. I painted the porch, fixed the leaky faucet, replaced the broken wind chime. I even started sleeping through the night again. Until one afternoon, I came home to find a car parked at the end of my driveway. A small grey sedan, engine running. And Olivia sitting inside. She stepped out when she saw me, wearing jeans and a plain sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. No makeup, no drama, just a woman who looked like she hadn't eaten properly in days. Maya, she said, voice low. Please don't close the door. I didn't. Not yet. She followed me inside, standing awkwardly near the doorway as if the floor itself might reject her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I brought these, she said, placing it on the table. Inside were 2 gold chains, our mother's necklace and Dad's pocket watch. I bought them back, she whispered. From a pawn shop in Savannah. It took me a few months, but I wanted to make it right. I stared at the items, then at her. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale. You look sick, I said quietly. She laughed bitterly. I've been worse. She sat down slowly, hands trembling. I got into trouble, Maya. I lost everything. The people I owed, they weren't patient. I thought if I could just get some quick money, I'd pay them back before you noticed. But it all fell apart. I didn't mean to hurt you. You did hurt me, I said softly. You didn't just steal money. You stole my peace. Her eyes filled with tears. I know. I think about it every day. Silence settled between us, heavy, but not hostile. She looked around the room, at the photos on the mantel, at the vase of fresh lilies on the counter. You kept this place beautiful, she murmured. Mom would have loved that. I poured her tea. We sat across from each other like strangers forced to share a meal. I came to say goodbye, she said after a long pause. I'm moving to Asheville. There's a rehab center there. I got accepted last week. My heart clenched. Rehab? She nodded. For gambling. It started small, online poker, sports betting. Then it turned into everything. That's why I did what I did. I didn't know what to say. I'd always suspected she had some kind of addiction, but hearing it aloud felt like being hit by cold water. I sold the last of my things to get in, she continued. They don't allow phones. I might be gone for a while. She looked up, meeting my eyes. I just didn't want you to think I disappeared again. The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Olivia, I said quietly, you don't owe me explanations. You owe yourself recovery. She let out a shaky breath. Do you think you could ever forgive me? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the thief, not the liar, but the broken girl who had spent her life running from her own reflection. Forgiveness isn't something I give all at once, I said finally. It's something that grows, if you let it. She nodded, her lip trembling. That's fair. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. There was an unspoken truce, fragile, uncertain, but real. After she left, I sat at the table staring at the pouch she'd brought. The necklace glinted in the light, and for the first time, it didn't remind me of loss. It reminded me of love, the kind that endures even when it's been shattered. Weeks passed. Then months. No calls, no letters. Until one morning, I received a small card in the mail. No return address, just a printed line that read, "Graduated. 1 year clean. Thank you for not giving up on me." I cried again that day, but the tears were different this time, softer, lighter. Sometimes, redemption doesn't arrive in grand gestures or apologies. Sometimes it comes in small envelopes, sealed with trembling hands. That evening, I went to the cemetery. The grass around Dad's headstone had grown long, swaying gently in the wind. I placed the ring, the necklace, and the watch on the stone for a moment, just to feel their weight together again. "I think you'd be proud of us," I whispered. It took a while, but we found our way. As the sun set behind the oak trees, I realized that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. It's choosing to live without the need for repayment. A few years passed before I saw Olivia again. By then, the house had changed, or maybe I had. The paint was new, the garden fuller, the silence softer. I had built a small life for myself, steady and quiet. I ran a floral business from home, catering to small weddings and funerals, and people had started to know my name again, not as the woman whose sister stole the funeral money, but as Maya, the one with the lilies. Healing, I've learned, doesn't arrive with a grand announcement. It sneaks up on you, one sunrise, one kind word, one deep breath at a time. Then, one afternoon in early autumn, a car pulled up outside my gate. I was arranging chrysanthemums for a memorial service when I heard the crunch of gravel. I looked out the window, and there she was. Olivia stepped out slowly, and I hardly recognized her. She looked healthy. Present. Her hair was shorter, her skin brighter, and her posture straighter. She wore a modest navy coat and carried a small bouquet of white tulips, our mother's favorite. For a long time, we just stood there, separated by years of silence and choices that couldn't be undone. "Can I come in?" she asked finally. I nodded. Inside, she looked around, smiling faintly. "You kept everything just the same." "Mostly," I said. "Some things don't need changing." She placed the tulips on the table. "For Mom," she said softly. "And for Dad too, I suppose." I thought it was time I brought something back instead of taking. I smiled, not out of happiness, but out of quiet relief. "You've come a long way, Liv." She nodded. 3 years clean. I work at a community center now, helping women who've lost their families or homes because of addiction or debt. Her voice trembled. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Maya. But I've learned that sometimes, forgiveness isn't about what we deserve." I looked at her then, really looked, and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. The kind that doesn't come from running or hiding, but from finally facing yourself in the mirror and choosing to stay. We had tea in silence. The same kitchen where we'd once fought and cried now felt different, almost sacred. "I wanted to tell you," she said, "I've been paying it back. Slowly. The funeral money. Every month, I put something aside. It's not much, but..." I reached across the table and stopped her. "It's not about the money anymore, Liv." Her eyes filled with tears. Then what's it about? It's about not losing each other again. She broke down then, quietly, not dramatically, just years of guilt dissolving into something softer. I stood and wrapped my arms around her, and for the first time since our parents' funeral, I held my sister without resentment. We stayed like that for a long time, until the kettle clicked off behind us. Later that night, after she left, I found an envelope tucked under the vase of tulips. Inside was a single page, a handwritten note. Maya, thank you for seeing the good in me when I couldn't. I'm sorry it took losing everything to understand what family really means. This time, I'm not running. Live. There was also a small money order, not much, just enough to cover the cost of our father's headstone that had gone unpaid years ago. I took it to the cemetery the next morning. The sky was pale, the air cool with the promise of rain. I kneeled beside my father's grave and traced my fingers over the engraving. The headstone was simple, just as he'd wanted. Harold Whitman, 1938 to 2020. He built more than homes, he built hearts. As I placed the tulips there, I whispered, "It's done now, Dad. We kept our promise." For the first time in years, I didn't feel the ache of unfinished business. Only gratitude. Gratitude that pain had turned into growth. That broken trust had become the soil for something living. Later that week, Olivia called. She was organizing a support group for siblings of addicts and asked if I would speak, not as the victim, but as someone who'd found healing through forgiveness. I hesitated at first, but then I said yes. When I stood before that small circle of women, sisters, mothers, daughters, I realized how universal betrayal can be, and how rare redemption is when pride gets in the way. I told them the truth. I didn't forgive her because she deserved it. I forgave her because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life hating someone who shared my blood. Afterward, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes and said, "You helped me call my sister again." That night, I went home, poured a cup of tea, and sat by the window. The wind moved softly through the trees, the sound almost like breathing. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't mean returning to how things were. It means loving someone enough to let them become who they're trying to be. And for the first time in years, I whispered into the quiet, "I'm proud of you, Liv." There are moments in life when betrayal doesn't come from strangers, but from the faces we grew up loving, the ones who knew our stories, our memories, our softness. That's what makes it hurt the most. But I've learned that forgiveness doesn't excuse what was done. It simply frees you from having to live inside that moment forever. When my sister stole from me, I thought I'd lost her for good. What I didn't realize was that forgiveness, slow, imperfect, and quiet, would bring us both home in the end. So if someone you love has broken your trust, take your time. Let the anger breathe, but don't let it harden you. Sometimes people return changed. Sometimes they don't. But you deserve the kind of peace that no apology can give. Tell me, would you have opened the door again? And if you've ever had to forgive someone who didn't deserve it, how did you find your peace? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about healing, redemption, and the courage to begin again.